Welcome to this special lecture to commemorate the memory of B.R. Ambedkar on his 130th birth anniversary. The lecture is part of a series of programs aimed at building momentum to the eagerly anticipated celebration of India at 75. Today's lecture is brought to you by the Malaysia-India Heritage Group in collaboration with the Indian High Commission in Malaysia. The lecture is titled The Story of Ambedkar, and our speaker is the legal advisor of the Malaysia-India Heritage Group, Mr. G. Rajasingham, advocate and solicitor of the High Court of Malaya, and a partner at Sheridan Delamore, one of the oldest law firms in the country, founded in 1905. His talk will focus on the life and influence of one of the founders of modern India, B.R. Ambedkar, the first law minister of free India, who was also a political thinker, reformist, jurist, human rights champion, and most importantly, the principal architect of the Constitution of India. With India's emergence onto the world stage as a political, economic, and military power, it is a wonder to recall that modern India attained the status of a free and sovereign nation less than 75 years ago. At 75, we are reminded of the significance of the national emblem and national flag that were officially adopted as symbols of the newly independent nation under the guidance of Ambedkar. The national emblem, with the words Satyameva Jayate, which means truth always triumphs, captures the spirit and soul of India. Ambedkar also headed the select committee in charge of adopting the national flag of India, the Dhamma Chakra, which occupies the center ensign, signifying that free India will progress in all directions along the path of Dhamma and justice. At 75, India is presented with the opportunity to realize the goals of a truly independent, progressive, and dynamic country as he had envisioned. Ambedkar's leadership was pivotal in the formation of the world's largest democracy. As architect of the Indian Constitution, Ambedkar emphasized human rights and justice as the foundation of free India. The Malaysia-India Heritage Group is most proud to acknowledge that the concept of basic rights in the Malaysian Constitution was inspired by the fundamental liberties enshrined in the Indian Constitution. Such is the greatness of Ambedkar that our celebration of India at 75 will be grossly incomplete without mention of this great son of India. Without further ado, may I now welcome Mr. G. Rajasingham to deliver his talk.
Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar was born on 14th of April 1891 in the military cantonment of MHOW, otherwise known as Military Headquarters of War, in the central provinces now known as Madhya Pradesh. He was the 14th and the last offspring of Ramji, Maloji Sakpal and Bhimabai Ambedkar. Of these 14 siblings, only 3 sons and 2 daughters would survive. Bhimrao's original name was Sakpal, but his father registered his name as Ambedkar in school, referring to his native village, Ambedkar. Bhimrao's father was an officer of the rank of Subedar in the British Indian Army, a rank equivalent to that of a captain. Both Bhimrao's father and grandfather had served in the respective armies of the British East India Company and the Crown. His family were Mahars, a depressed class of people but fierce fighters whose valor and fighting spirit saw them being enlisted in the fight against the Mughals. The Mahars would later be recruited by the East India Company for the very same reasons. But as depressed caste, the Mahars were treated as untouchable and were subjected to social and economic discrimination like many others at the time. After Ramji retired from the military in 1894, Bhimrao and his family shifted to Satara, a district in Maharashtra where Bhimrao's father began to work as a storekeeper in the Public Works Department in the Goregaon district. In Satara, Bhimrao was enrolled by his parents in a primary school at the young age of 3. Growing up, there were many incidents in his childhood that left a lasting but painful memory in young Bhimrao's mind. In fact, his father had to use his position in the army to lobby for his children to study at the government school as they faced opposition owing to their caste. In school, Bhimrao and the other children from the depressed classes were segregated and often were given no attention or assistance by their teachers. He would in his later years, particularly in a 20-page autobiography written in the period between 1935 and 36, which he named Waiting for a Visa, recall and narrate various incidents that highlighted the humiliating treatment meted down to the people of lower caste. At 9, he learnt that as a person from an oppressed class, he was subjected to certain indignities and discriminations. For instance, he and his siblings, who on their way to see their father, were left stranded at a railway station as they were unable to secure a bullock cart for hire to take them to their father, because no bullock cart driver was prepared to suffer being polluted by carrying the children from the lower caste. In school, he was told that he could not sit amongst his classmates, but instead he was directed to sit at a corner by himself on a separate piece of gunny cloth. The servant employed to clean the cloth would not touch the gunny cloth used by Bhimrao. The young Bhimrao was made to carry the gunny cloth home in the evenings and bring it back the next day. The young Bhimrao could not drink from the water tap like his other classmates from the upper castes. The tap had to be opened for him by and in the presence of the school peon. As the peon was seldom around, and so to the young Bhimrao, no peon meant no water. At home, his clothes had to be washed by his sisters, as no washerman was prepared to wash the clothes of the untouchable. Likewise, Bhimrao could not visit a barber and had his hair cut by his sister because of his caste, as no barber would consent to shave an untouchable. At the age of 9, Bhimrao was admitted to the first standard in a government high school in Satara, which was an English medium high school. It was in high school that he met his teacher, Krishnaji Keshav Ambedkar, a Brahmin, who took a liking to him and changed young Bhimrao's surname from Ambedkar to his own Ambedkar in the school records. When Bhimrao was 13 years old, his father, who had since remarried, relocated his family from Satara to Bombay. In Bombay, Bhimrao, along with his two brothers, were enrolled into the Maratha High School, where he excelled in his studies. It was also in Bombay that he was admitted into the Elphinstone High School, one of the top schools in Bombay at the time. To his credit, Bhimrao was the first person from a depressed caste to enter Elphinstone High School. But the prejudices he faced as a person of depressed caste continued to plague him in this supposedly egalitarian high school. But it did not deter him. At the age of 16, Bhimrao passed his matriculation examinations. Although Bhimrao was encouraged by his father to pursue higher studies, he was financially unable to continue his education. It was then that Bhimrao's well-wishers introduced him to the then Maharaja of Baroda. The Maharaja of Baroda had offered financial assistance to any worthy applicant from a depressed caste who wished to pursue higher studies. The Maharaja, who was thoroughly impressed with Bhimrao, granted him a scholarship to pursue his college education. In 1913, at the age of 22, Ambedkar obtained his Bachelor of Arts degree from University of Bombay. It was also in the same year that Maharaja Baroda made an announcement that he would sponsor deserving students for higher studies at Columbia University in the United States of America. Ambedkar quickly availed himself of this opportunity and obtained an annual scholarship to study at Columbia University. In Columbia University, Ambedkar secured admission into the Department of Political Science. In 1915, at the age of 24, Ambedkar obtained his Master of Arts degree from Columbia University, majoring in economics with sociology, history, philosophy, and anthropology as other subjects of study. At Columbia University, Ambedkar began to make intellectual and personal connections that would help to shape his views and outlook for the rest of his life. In America, Ambedkar experienced what it was like to be able to move, think, and speak freely without the stigma of being someone from a depressed caste. In 1916, at the age of 25, Ambedkar left the United States of America to join the London School of Economics and Political Science to pursue a doctoral thesis in economics. At the same time, he enrolled for the bar course at the Gray's Inn. Ambedkar was, however, shocked when he was compelled to return to India before the completion of the course, as the scholarship awarded by the government Baroda had expired. Speaking about his time in Europe and America, Ambedkar would later recall that his 5 years of stay in Europe and America had completely wiped off the consciousness in his mind that he was an untouchable, and that an untouchable was a problem to himself and to others wherever he went in India. He returned to India, reaching Bombay in August of 1970. He was a voracious reader, devouring large quantities of books. Not many people know that his precious collection of books, which he had sent back to India on a separate steamer, was torpedoed and sunk by a German submarine. After all, it was World War I then. Upon his return, Ambedkar proceeded to serve his bond with the state of Baroda. He was given a post of a military secretary in the state. Even though it was a high-ranking position, no hotel was prepared to house him. Even his clerk hesitated to fetch him a glass of water due to the stigma of untouchability. He described those incidents in his autobiography, Waiting for a Visa. Needless to say, Ambedkar resigned the post. In 1918, he was appointed to the post of Professor of Political Economy in Sydenham College of Commerce and Economics in Bombay, a post which would resign at the age of 27. There too, he faced discrimination from the teaching faculty who refused to share even a common jug of water with him. It dawned on the highly educated Ambedkar that in their eyes, Ambedkar was no better than his uneducated and illiterate brethren. Later that year, in 1920, he returned to the London School of Economics and Political Science to complete his thesis for a master's degree. And in 1922, he was admitted to the Gray's Inn of London as a barrister at law. In the following year, he completed a doctorate in science in economics at the University of London. In Bombay, he got to know the Maharaja of Kolhapur, who had been in the forefront for breaking down caste barriers and helping the untouchables in every possible way he could. In 1919, the Maharaja of Kolhapur helped Ambedkar to start a fortnightly paper under the name Muk Nayak, which meant the leader of the voiceless. Muk Nayak will be followed by his other journals, Bahishkrit Bharat, meaning excluded India, and the Janata, the people. In the early 1920s, India was being molded by various struggles. Like many others in India at that time, the downtrodden classes, particularly the depressed castes, were awakening. Ambedkar became a catalyst for their cause. He sought to bring about an awakening among the depressed castes. In March 1920, the Maharaja of Kolhapur organized the first conference of untouchables. Ambedkar was its chairman. After the conference, Ambedkar was publicly praised by the Maharaja of Kolhapur as their future national leader. In the fullness of time, the Maharaja will be proven right. In 1923, Ambedkar returned to India from London and applied for a sanad, or permission, to practice law in the High Court of Bombay. It must be noted that although Ambedkar had achieved a very high level of distinction in the acquisition of academic qualification, financially he was not well off. He wanted to practice law so that he could advocate the cause of the downtrodden people in India. However, his caste, once again, was an obstacle to his ambitions. The upper class society was not prepared to engage the highly qualified lawyer because of his caste, whilst the poor did not have the ability to pay for his services. In 1926, he successfully defended 3 non-Brahmin leaders who had been sued for defamation for having accused the Brahmin community of ruining India. In 1927, Ambedkar launched a series of active agitations and movements against untouchability. He started with public marches to open up the streets and roads to the untouchable. He was behind the public marches to open up the public drinking resources to the untouchables. The word Satyagraha means a policy of passive political resistance, advocated and made famous by Mahatma Gandhi against the British rule in India. The Mahat Satyagraha of 1927 was one of the defining moments in Ambedkar's political thought and action. It was held in the small town of Mahat in Maharashtra. The Mahat Satyagraha was held 3 years prior to Mahatma Gandhi's Dandi March. Ambedkar's crusade was about drinking water, while Mahatma Gandhi marched for salt. This took place a year after Ambedkar was nominated by the Governor of Bombay to serve as a member of the Bombay Legislative Council. It is written that by leading a group of Dalits to drink water from Chawda Lake in Mahat, Ambedkar did not just assert the right of Dalits to take water from public water sources. He sowed the seeds of Dalit emancipation. He began a struggle for the right of an untouchable to enter Hindu temples to worship his god. In 1930, Ambedkar launched the Kalaram Temple movement. The Kalaram Temple, dedicated to Lord Rama, was one of the most important Hindu temples in Nashik city. Despite its importance, Dalits were prohibited from entering the temple. The Kalaram Temple Satyagraha saw 15,000 volunteers participate in a peaceful procession of men and women. They were led by Ambedkar. This was a pivotal event in the Dalit emancipation movement in India. In between his practice of law and his crusade against untouchability, he tried promoting education to the untouchable caste to uplift them. He established a chain of schools, colleges, and hostels under the buffer of the People's Education Society founded by him in 1945. In 1927, Ambedkar was formally awarded his PhD degree from Columbia University for his thesis on the evolution of provincial finance in British India. In the 1930s, Dr. Ambedkar's voice was being heard louder and clearer as he fought for the rights of the downtrodden classes in India. He long demanded separate electorates for the depressed classes in India. In 1932, the British colonial government under Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald announced a formation of a separate electorate for depressed classes in the communal award. Mahatma Gandhi was fiercely opposed to the idea of separate electorates, which he feared would divide the Hindus, the way the partition had divided Muslims from Hindus. Babu's protest took the form of a fast, till his death if necessary, he said, which he undertook while imprisoned in the central jail of Pune. Fearing for Gandhi's health, the congressional politicians and activists met and brokered a deal. The result was Pune Pact, signed on 25 September 1932 by Dr. Ambedkar on behalf of the depressed classes among Hindus and Madan Mohan Malaviya on behalf of the other Hindus. The Pune Pact gave seats to the depressed classes in the provisional legislatures within the general electorates. Due to this agreement, the depressed classes received 148 seats in the legislature instead of the 71 allocated in the communal award proposed by the colonial government. In May of 1936, Dr. Ambedkar would publish his seminal work, Annihilation of Caste. His work heavily criticized the caste system. In 1936, he founded his first political party, the Independent Labour Party, which contested in the 1937 general elections and won almost all of its contested seats. In 1942, Dr. Ambedkar founded his second political party, the All India Scheduled Caste Federation, which did not do as well in the elections of 1946. He would serve on the Defence Advisory Committee and the Viceroy's Executive Council as the Minister for Labour. Most democracies are governed by their respective written constitutions. India is no different, except that in her case, it is the longest written constitution in any sovereign country in the world. The task of drafting a constitution for India was handed to the 8 members of the drafting committee, which was led by Dr. Ambedkar, India's first Minister for Law and Justice. Being the social reformist and the human rights advocate that he was, Dr. Ambedkar excelled in this role. He was fully conscious that the document of destiny, which his committee was about to draft under his stewardship, will serve a new democracy like India, where many divergent and opposing interests and conflicting opinions were bound. It was a gargantuan task. The draft prepared by Dr. Ambedkar provided for constitutional guarantees and protection for a wide range of civil liberties for individual citizens, including freedom of religion, the abolishment of untouchability, and the outlawing of all forms of discrimination. In the draft, Dr. Ambedkar introduced measures akin to affirmative action to help members of the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes. The final copy of the draft constitution was handed by Dr. Ambedkar to the President of the Indian Constituent Assembly on 25th of November 1949. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, as the President of the Assembly, praised Dr. Ambedkar for his untiring services to the nation as the Chairman of the Drafting Committee, working day to day in spite of his poor health. The Constituent Assembly met in sessions which were open to the public. It met for 166 days, spread over a period of 2 years, 11 months and 18 days before the Assembly finally adopted the Constitution on 26th of November 1949. It must be noted, however, that there were over 2,000 amendments mooted to the draft constitution, and those amendments were debated in the assembly. On 24th of January 1950, the then 308 members of the assembly signed 2 copies of the Indian constitution, one in Hindi, the other in English. 2 days later, on 26th of January, the Constitution of India became the supreme law of India, governing over every square inch of the nation and its territories. The original text of the Constitution contained 395 articles in 22 parts and 8 schedules. The preamble of the Constitution declares India to be a sovereign, democratic republic and a welfare state committed to secure justice, liberty and equality. The objectives specified in the preamble constitute the basic structure of the Constitution, which cannot be amended. For his unparalleled contributions to the Constitution of India, Dr. Ambedkar has come to be regarded as the father or architect of the Indian Constitution. India achieved her independence from British in 1947, and Dr. Ambedkar was sworn in as the first Law Minister of independent India. This was a testament to the trust and faith the Congress party leaders, mostly from upper caste and the upper classes, had in Dr. Ambedkar despite their differences in the past. As a law minister, his focus was on women and labour rights. It has been written that Dr. Ambedkar's ideas influenced the enactment of many subsequent pro-women legislations, such as Sati Prevention Act of 1987, the Dowry Prohibition Act of 1961, and the Maternity Benefit Act also of 1961, to cite a few. A noteworthy mention is the Hindu Code Bill. This bill was introduced in Constituent Assembly in August of 1946, but received no traction. The Hindu Code Bill sought to introduce revolutionary changes to the Hindu social order. It sought to codify and reform Hindu personal law in India. The bill was reintroduced in the legislature by Dr. Ambedkar in his capacity as a law minister. His Hindu Code Bill had sought to enshrine, amongst others, gender equality in the laws of inheritance and marriage. The Hindu Code Bill generated countless debates, protests, and rallies against it. There was immense vocal opposition against the bill, which came from all strata and divide of the social and political India. The intense and violent opposition to the Hindu Code Bill will precipitate Dr. Ambedkar's exit from the government. Dr. Ambedkar was the first Indian to pursue a doctorate in economics abroad. He was both a trained and professional economist. He advocated industrialization and agriculture growth as tools to develop the Indian economy. He was vehemently opposed to income tax for the lower income group. He advocated land reforms and state economic development. He showed that the caste system impeded movement of labor and capital. He advocated birth control to develop the Indian economy. And he pushed to secure equal rights for women in economic development. It is not without reason or cause that the Nobel Memorial Prize winner for economics, Amartya Kumar Sen, professed Dr. Ambedkar to be the father of his economics. Not to be left out, the notable Indian economist and expert of Dr. Ambedkar, Narendra Jadev, opined that Dr. Ambedkar was the highest educated Indian economist of all times. In September of 1951, Prime Minister Nehru told the Indian Parliament that his government had resigned itself to the fact that the Hindu Code Bill will not be passed in then session of the Parliament. As explained earlier, there was fierce opposition to the Hindu Code Bill from certain quarters as the bill sought to alter rigid social patterns, some of which were 5,000 years old and would affect hundreds of millions of Hindus in India. Dr. Ambedkar, the author of the bill, was disappointed and dejected. He had hoped to see the bill through as one of his last contributions to social reforms under the then government. On October 11, 1951, Dr. Ambedkar quit his post in Nehru's cabinet, citing his disappointment and disillusion with the Indian government's treatment of the untouchables, despite the abolition of the Hindu caste distinction by the Constitution of India. He had prepared a statement of more than 4,000 words which he intended to read from the Parliament floor, but was refused by the Deputy Speaker, who had insisted that the statement must be vetted beforehand by the Speaker. Naturally, Dr. Ambedkar refused. He walked out of Parliament and distributed it to the waiting press. Dr. Ambedkar never returned to the government. He stood as an independent but was defeated in a parliamentary election to Lok Sabha in 1954. Lok Sabha is the lower house of the Indian Parliament. He was later appointed to the Rajya Sabha, the upper house of Parliament, in 1952, where he remained as a member till his death. After prolonged and careful contemplation, Dr. Ambedkar decided that he would embrace Buddhism. He announced to his followers that he would do so on 14th of October 1956 at Nagpur. A very large crowd of approximately 500,000 men, women and children came to witness this event. Dr. Ambedkar and his wife took the oath of 3 jewels and 5 precepts from the Burmese monk. He then administered the oath of 3 jewels, 5 precepts and the 22 vows to his thousands of followers. It is reported that in a choking voice he renounced Hinduism and asked who amongst the crowd wanted to embrace Buddhism. The crowd rose to their feet in answer. It is reputed to be the largest religious conversion in the world. Since 1948, Dr. Ambedkar was a diabetic. He had poor eyesight and his health worsened by 1955. He was bedridden at most times. In 1956, Dr. Ambedkar attended a conference on Buddhism in Kathmandu, Nepal, where he delivered his address entitled Buddha and Karl Marx. His health deteriorated rapidly upon his return to India. He breathed his last in his sleep at his home in Delhi on 6 December 1956, just 3 days after he completed his final manuscript, The Buddha and His Dharma. He was 65 years of age. A Buddhist cremation ceremony was held for him, and over 500,000 grieving mourners attended his funeral. India did right to honor Dr. Ambedkar, one of her most glorious and illustrious sons. In 1990, Dr. Ambedkar was posthumously awarded the highest civilian honor of Bharat Ratna by the then President Ramaswamy Venkataraman. In 2018, Prime Minister Modi inaugurated the Ambedkar National Memorial. To this day, Dr. Ambedkar's birth date is celebrated as a public holiday in India known as Ambedkar Jayanti. As I approach the end of my talk, I must confess that neither I nor anyone else for that matter can do justice to Dr. Ambedkar's gargantuan life and contribution in just under an hour. How does one sum up this extraordinary human being? He was voted the greatest Indian in a nation poll held in 2012, defeating even Nehru. He rose to great heights despite the tremendous adversity occasioned by discrimination and oppression. Baba Sahib Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar was an intellectual giant and a social reformist ahead of his time, a visionary leader who brought dignity, respect, and above all, rights to the most oppressed classes of people. Millions have worshipped him, millions more still do, and millions more would continue to worship a man who is seen as the Messiah of the oppressed and the downtrodden classes in India. In Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, you will find, as I did, a man who feverishly believed in and held on to the unperishable truth that all humans are equal, distinguished only by their character and the contents of their heart. A man who throughout his time on this earth stood and fought for equality of the oppressed classes, ever demanding social justice and equality for all. Justice, liberty, and equality for the people, as he proclaimed in the Indian Constitution. A very wise man in my lifetime remarked that Dr. Ambedkar was living proof that brilliance requires no pedigree. With that, I conclude my talk for this session. I am indeed indebted to you for your kind patience and attention. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rajasingham, for the presentation and the audience for your attention. Ambedkar represents a dream that is cherished by millions throughout India. It is a universal aspiration for equality that is also reflected in the minds of countless people from all parts of the world. On the home front, the Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi has reassured the people that the government is committed to fulfilling Ambedkar's unfulfilled dreams for a unified India. Dreams well worth cherishing on the occasion of the 75th year of Indian independence. Until we meet again, I would like to convey the season's greetings for a happy new year and the dawn of a new hope.